Wow, where do I even begin? So, my brother's fiancée made me a bridesmaid. Can you believe that? She then proceeded to bully me for leaving my ex. And just when I thought things couldn't get crazier, she banned me from the wedding. But hold on, this week, my brother, Chris, called off their entire engagement after finding out how she treated me. This was supposed to be a monumental week for my brother, Chris. He had been preparing to marry his fiancée, April, after being together for over 2 years. Their relationship had blossomed into something truly special. Chris even proposed to her during a picture-perfect trip to Greece. He came back on cloud 9, his joy radiating through the entire family, and we could all feel it. We were all so thrilled, not just for Chris, but also because April was a lovely person. The two of them just seemed like a perfect match, and it felt like everything was falling into place as the wedding plans took shape. April, it turns out, had always dreamed of a grand, almost fairy tale-like wedding. And Chris, being the devoted partner he is, was more than willing to make that dream come true. He didn't want anything to be less than perfect for her. He took on the responsibility of covering all the wedding expenses, which, let me tell you, was no small feat. Chris is a vice president at his company, and while he has a good job and worked hard to get there, organizing such a big wedding is still a huge task. But not once did he seem to mind. It was clear that he was fully committed to making sure April had everything she wanted. And the rest of the family? We were all in, offering our support and eagerly looking forward to what promised to be a truly special celebration. Then, 2 months ago, April asked me out for lunch, and that's when she surprised me by asking me to be part of her bridesmaid squad. I honestly didn't expect it at all. See, I had only just moved back home after years of living far away from my family, so April and I hadn't had many chances to bond before that lunch. We'd only really interacted a handful of times at family events or gatherings whenever I was in town. So, you can imagine how surprised I was when she extended the invitation. April went on to explain that my brother would be really happy to see me standing by their side, and that she saw me as the right person to stand next to her on such an important day, alongside her closest friends. And honestly, it was touching because Chris and I have always been close, and knowing that my presence at the altar would mean something special to him was such an honor. The gesture meant even more to me in that moment. It felt like April wasn't just welcoming me into the wedding, but opening the door to a closer connection between us. And that made it all the more meaningful. I felt so deeply honored by her request. It seemed like a significant step not only towards building a stronger relationship with April but also a way to support my brother on one of the most important days of his life. So, I accepted the invitation without hesitation. Now I want to share a bit more about why I moved back home. It's because I recently escaped from a toxic and abusive relationship. Honestly, it still feels unreal to me how my ex, someone I once trusted and cared for, could change into someone I didn't even recognize. We had been together for a long time, and for most of our relationship, everything seemed fine. We had what looked like a stable relationship, no big arguments or issues, nothing that would make me think things were about to take a turn. That's what made it all the more difficult to process. There were no warning signs, no build-up. He was never the type to raise his voice or act aggressively. And then, out of nowhere, everything changed. His behavior shifted in ways I had never seen before, and it felt like I was suddenly living with a complete stranger. He started shouting at me over the smallest things. He'd get so close to my face when he was angry. This darkness that I hadn't even known existed in him started to show, and it terrified me. Then, one evening, it all reached a breaking point. We were just doing what we normally did, watching Netflix, chatting about which movie to watch next. Nothing heated, nothing contentious. Just a normal, trivial conversation that couples have all the time. That's when it happened. Without any warning, without any provocation, he turned to me and slapped me across the face. The force of it hit me so suddenly that I was completely stunned. It felt like I'd been yanked out of reality, and for a moment, I couldn't even process what had just happened. My cheek burned with an intense sting that spread across my face, and tears immediately filled my eyes, not just from the pain, but from the shock. What shook me to my core, though, was the look on his face. He didn't seem to care at all. There was no remorse, no sign of regret. He was completely nonchalant, as if slapping me across the face was just a normal, everyday occurrence. Then, in this cold, emotionless tone, he told me that I should never argue with him again about which movie to watch. His tone made it seem like I deserved what had just happened, simply because I dared to express a preference. And just like that, he picked a movie for himself and continued watching as if nothing had happened, leaving me in a state of stunned disbelief, hurt, and utter confusion. For the first time, I felt like the person sitting next to me might actually be a monster. That night marked the end of whatever relationship we once had. It was clear I needed to get out. This wasn't a person I could trust or feel safe with anymore. It wasn't just the slap. It was the complete lack of humanity in his reaction, the way he thought it was okay to control me with violence. Once the initial shock wore off, I got up from the couch without a word and headed upstairs. My adrenaline kicked in, and all I could think about was leaving. I grabbed my bags, starting to pack. As I did, I could hear him shouting after me, calling me weak, accusing me of overreacting, and taunting me for not being able to handle one slap. His words cut deeper than the physical pain. How could he be so insensitive? How could he not understand the damage he had just caused? The worst part? He was trying to justify his actions, minimizing what had happened and making it seem like I was the one in the wrong for wanting to leave. The man I thought I knew was gone, and in his place was someone who could not have been further from the person I had trusted. That realization hit me hard. Staying any longer could only lead to more harm. I had to get out, immediately, so I left. I didn't say a word. I didn't want to escalate things further. For the next few days, I stayed at a hotel, trying to figure out what to do next. On one hand, I was devastated. This was someone I had been with for so long, and we had built a life together. His family had become like my own, but on the other hand, I knew deep down I had made the right decision to leave. There was no going back after what had happened. There was no way to undo the damage or trust him again. When his parents found out what had happened, they reached out to me. I knew they would eventually. After all, they had always considered me a part of their family. It wasn't like me to just disappear without any explanation, so when his parents called, I told them everything. I didn't hold back. I shared how his behavior had changed so drastically over the past few months, how he had become more aggressive, more controlling, and of course, I told them about that night when he hit me. To my relief, they were genuinely concerned. They could hardly believe what I was saying, and like me, they struggled to reconcile this version of him with the son they thought they knew. They agreed that this wasn't like him at all and acknowledged just how serious the situation had become. I think it was hard for them to hear, but at least they didn't try to defend his actions or dismiss my experience. That gave me a little comfort, knowing that I wasn't alone in recognizing how wrong his behavior had been. Everyone who knew him, including his own family, would have said the same thing. This wasn't the person they knew, and something had clearly gone terribly wrong. That week, his parents visited him, and they noticed something was seriously off. His behavior was erratic and completely out of character. Alarmed by what they saw, they decided to take him to the hospital to get checked out. It was during that visit that they discovered he had a brain tumor. The news was absolutely shocking. Suddenly, everything, the strange behavior, the aggression, the sudden shift in his personality, started to make sense. It wasn't that he had just become abusive out of nowhere. He had a personality shift because of something far beyond his control. The tumor was affecting his behavior in ways none of us could have predicted. When I found out, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It meant that the person I had cared for, the person I thought I knew, hadn't suddenly turned into an abuser. His actions were the result of a medical condition that neither of us had known about. But still, despite this revelation, it didn't change the fact that everything between us had already fallen apart. We both met after his checkup, and we agreed that it was best for us to go our separate ways. The tumor explained his actions, but it didn't erase what had happened. I still resented how he had slapped me that night. That moment, that violation of trust, remained with me, no matter the reasons behind it. There was just too much hurt, confusion, and fear still lingering. It wasn't something we could simply move past. So, we made the difficult decision to break up. It was heartbreaking. I had spent so much time with him, and despite everything, I still cared about him deeply. After the breakup, I felt completely lost. It was a lot to process. The trauma of what had happened, the guilt of leaving, and the grief of ending a long-term relationship that I had once thought would last. That's when I decided to move back home. I needed a fresh start, a change of scenery, and most importantly, the support of my family to help me heal. This backstory about my ex is essential because it explains a lot about why April started to resent me after she found out about my past relationship. You see, my whole family knows the details of what I went through, and they've been nothing but supportive. They understood how impossible that situation was and why I had no choice but to leave. No one has ever blamed me for walking away from my ex, especially given the circumstances. However, when April found out about what happened, she had a very different reaction. April is quite religious, and her views on relationships and commitment are deeply rooted in her faith. Whenever we got together for any family event leading up to her wedding, whether it was lunch or just a casual outing, April would make these backhanded comments here and there that made me feel judged and set apart. She made it clear that she thought I had made the wrong decision by leaving my ex. According to her, it was wrong to abandon a partner during difficult times, regardless of the circumstances. She would even talk about how people who leave their loved ones in such situations end up with bad karma. Naturally, this infuriated me. I was already struggling with my own guilt and heartbreak, trying to come to terms with the fact that I had left someone who was dealing with a serious medical condition. Even though his behavior had become abusive, it wasn't like I walked away easily. It was a decision I agonized over. But at the same time, I knew I hadn't been married to my ex, so I had no obligations. I shouldn't have been expected to stay in a relationship that had turned toxic, especially when his mood swings and aggression were putting my well-being in danger. Still, April's comments cut deep, making me feel worse about an already painful situation. I confided in my brother about how much April's remarks bothered me. My brother, though, tried to defend her, explaining that April's upbringing had been different from ours and that she had always been taught to stick it out in relationships. That's why she felt the way she did. He would urge me not to take her comments too personally, telling me she wasn't trying to be hurtful. He meant well, but it didn't make things any easier for me. Every time I saw April, I braced myself for a new comment that would make me feel judged for a decision I was already struggling with. Things took a frustrating turn when April and my brother sent out wedding invitations to everyone. She had graciously given everyone a +1, which I appreciated, but I sent back my RSVP indicating that it would just be me attending. I wasn't bringing anyone, as I was still recovering from my breakup and wasn't in any place to have someone new in my life. To my surprise, April began insisting that I should invite my ex to the wedding. I scoffed at the idea and told her plainly that this was impossible. I hadn't even spoken to him since the breakup, and the thought of inviting him to my brother's wedding, of all places, made no sense whatsoever. I was just beginning to heal, and bringing him into such an intimate family event felt wrong on every level. But April didn't seem to understand that. She kept pushing the idea, repeating that it would be a good gesture and that I should let bygones be bygones. She insisted that he must be suffering after I left him, and I should at least invite him so he could have a good time at their wedding. It felt like she wasn't even trying to understand my feelings about the situation. Normally, I would have just nodded along and tried to ignore her comments, like my brother had told me, just to keep the peace. But as you can imagine, I was starting to get really irritated with her. There was one occasion where she crossed the line once again. We were all out for lunch, and April had invited her entire bridesmaid squad. We were discussing dresses and other wedding details, trying to enjoy the fun and excitement that comes with wedding planning. But of course, April found a way to steer the conversation back to my ex. She brought up the situation again and started telling the other girls how I had been mean for breaking up with him. That poor fellow, after he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She framed it like I was some heartless woman who had walked out on him in his hardest time. I could feel the tension rise in the air as she continued to paint me as the villain in front of the other bridesmaids. It was humiliating and infuriating. Here we were in a supposedly light-hearted setting, talking about dresses and wedding plans, and she was dragging up my most painful personal experience as if it were some casual gossip. The whole thing felt completely inappropriate, and I struggled to keep my composure as the other girls exchanged awkward glances. These girls, April's childhood friends who were going to be her bridesmaids, seemed to share her beliefs and values, likely influenced by their similar religious upbringings. They jumped on the bandwagon and started bombarding me with questions about my ex and our past relationship. Their questioning became relentless, and I could feel my patience slipping away. At that moment, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about my ex anymore. This was about April's inability to respect my choices and boundaries. Without holding back, I asked April outright, "What's your problem with me?" I demanded to know why she was so obsessed with my breakup and my ex. I had never confronted her directly before, so she was visibly taken aback at first. I could see the shock in her expression. She didn't expect me to question her like this, especially not in front of her friends. Finally, she spluttered out an explanation that left me both shocked and furious. April said that now that she was marrying into our family, she felt that if I could give up so easily on my partner, it reflected poorly not only on my upbringing, but ultimately on my brother too. She continued to say how my brother had always told her about my relationship with my ex over the years, and hearing that I left such a long-term relationship without giving it any careful thought reflected negatively on my character and, by extension, on my family and my brother. Her words were like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. April somehow felt entitled to tell me what I should have done in a situation that she knew only bits and pieces of. The nerve of her to think that my personal choices had anything to do with her relationship with my brother. I was livid. I firmly told her that my relationship with my ex was none of her business, and it never had been. I pointed out that my decisions in life had nothing to do with my family or my brother. I was done letting her cross that line and made it crystal clear that she needed to respect my boundaries by never bringing this up again. The atmosphere at the table grew tense, and I could feel the awkwardness settle over the group, so I didn't bother to stay a minute longer and simply left. I had finally said what I needed to say. Anyway, since that heated conversation with April, things between us only got worse. She never apologized to me, and neither did I. Every time I thought we might be able to move past it, she found new ways to take out her frustration on me. It started with her nitpicking about my bridesmaid dress. April approved everyone else's dresses without any issue, but when it came to mine, she kept changing her mind. I had to reorder my dress 4 times, each one in line with the wedding theme, yet none seemed to satisfy her. It became clear that this wasn't about the dress. It was about making my life difficult because of the tension between us. I didn't want to start another fight, so I went along with the changes, hoping it would end there. But of course it didn't. After the dress ordeal, she found something new to criticize. This time it was about my appearance. She flat out told me that I needed to get a fake tan done before the wedding. I was stunned. I've never had a fake tan in my life, and I had no intention of starting now, especially not for someone else's wedding. April explained that because of my naturally fair complexion, I stood out the most among her bridesmaids, and she wanted me to tone it down so I wouldn't stand out in the wedding photos. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was offensive on so many levels. Being told that my skin tone didn't fit her vision was insulting and hurtful. I firmly told her that there was no way I would be getting a fake tan just to blend in for her pictures. I even offered to stay out of the photos if it bothered her that much, but I wasn't going to change my appearance for her wedding. The next issue that arose was that April wanted all of her bridesmaids to plan an extravagant bachelorette party for her, which on its own wasn't unreasonable, but her expectations were wildly unrealistic. She insisted that we all contribute, disinvited me from the wedding. He was furious. He called me right away, asking me what had happened. I explained everything. How April had escalated the situation with her constant demands, her unrealistic expectations, and how she had disrespected me to the point of excluding me from the wedding. I didn't hold back, telling him that I had tried to make things work and had even attempted to compromise, but nothing was ever enough for her. To my surprise, my brother listened carefully and didn't immediately defend her. Instead, he was quiet for a while before he spoke. He told me that he was sorry for how things had played out and that he understood why I was upset. He also acknowledged that April's behavior had been out of line, especially her treatment of me over the wedding and the bachelorette party. I could tell he was disappointed by how things had unfolded, but he didn't blame me for not wanting to put up with her treatment anymore. The conversation ended with him saying that he needed to talk to April about her actions. He promised me that he would address the issue, though I could tell it was going to be an uncomfortable conversation. A few days later, my brother called me again. He told me that after a long discussion with April, she had apologized, though, honestly, it felt more like a forced apology than a sincere one. April still wasn't willing to completely acknowledge how hurtful her actions had been, but she told him that she didn't want me to miss the wedding. She tried to justify her behavior by claiming she was just stressed out and wanted everything to go perfectly. But it was clear to me that this apology didn't come from a place of true understanding or remorse. It felt like she was only trying to save face in front of my brother and the rest of the family. I still wasn't sure if I should accept her apology, especially after everything she had put me through, but my brother encouraged me to let it go for the sake of family and try to move past it. I wasn't sure how to proceed. On one hand, I didn't want to make things more difficult for my brother, who had already been caught in the middle of this drama. On the other hand, I didn't want to be a doormat or let April's behavior slide without any consequences. I was torn between wanting to repair things for my brother's sake and not wanting to subject myself to more of her disrespectful treatment. In the end, I chose to attend the wedding, but I made it clear to my brother that I was doing it for him, not for April. I went, but I did so with a heavy heart, still carrying the frustration and hurt from everything that had happened. The wedding day itself was full of awkward moments, with me trying to stay out of the way and keep the peace. I wasn't sure where things stood with April, whether we could ever truly move past this, or if this would forever be a strained relationship. It wasn't the joyful occasion I had hoped for, but I tried to focus on being there for my brother on his special day, even if the circumstances were less than ideal. Disinvited me from the wedding, he was furious. He called me right away, asking me what had happened. I explained everything, how April had escalated the situation with her constant demands, her unrealistic expectations, and how she had disrespected me to the point of excluding me from the wedding. I didn't hold back, telling him that I had tried to make things work and had even attempted to compromise, but nothing was ever enough for her. To my surprise, my brother listened carefully and didn't immediately defend her. Instead, he was quiet for a while before he spoke. He told me that he was sorry for how things had played out and that he understood why I was upset. He also acknowledged that April's behavior had been out of line, especially her treatment of me over the wedding and the bachelorette party. I could tell he was disappointed by how things had unfolded, but he didn't blame me for not wanting to put up with her treatment anymore. The conversation ended with him saying that he needed to talk to April about her actions. He promised me that he would address the issue, though I could tell it was going to be an uncomfortable conversation. A few days later, my brother called me again. He told me that after a long discussion with April, she had apologized, though, honestly, it felt more like a forced apology than a sincere one. April still wasn't willing to completely acknowledge how hurtful her actions had been, but she told him that she didn't want me to miss the wedding. She tried to justify her behavior by claiming she was just stressed out and wanted everything to go perfectly. But it was clear to me that this apology didn't come from a place of true understanding or remorse. It felt like she was only trying to save face in front of my brother and the rest of the family. I still wasn't sure if I should accept her apology, especially after everything she had put me through, but my brother encouraged me to let it go for the sake of family and try to move past it. I wasn't sure how to proceed. On one hand, I didn't want to make things more difficult for my brother, who had already been caught in the middle of this drama. On the other hand, I didn't want to be a doormat or let April's behavior slide without any consequences. I was torn between wanting to repair things for my brother's sake and not wanting to subject myself to more of her disrespectful treatment. In the end, I chose to attend the wedding, but I made it clear to my brother that I was doing it for him, not for April. I went, but I did so with a heavy heart, still carrying the frustration and hurt from everything that had happened. The wedding day itself was full of awkward moments, with me trying to stay out of the way and keep the peace. I wasn't sure where things stood with April, whether we could ever truly move past this, or if this would forever be a strained relationship. It wasn't the joyful occasion I had hoped for, but I tried to focus on being there for my brother on his special day, even if the circumstances were less than ideal. For "Oh Minnie, you said," uninvited me. He was understandably upset. He called me to ask for an explanation, and I told him everything that had happened between us. After that, I'm not sure exactly what transpired between April and my brother, but he seemed to have confronted her about it privately, and I guess things must have not gone well, because this week my brother announced to me and the rest of our family that the wedding was off. We were in shock. He was refusing to marry her altogether. Now I feel terrible because my family kind of blames me for this outcome. They are saying it's my fault for refusing to make minor adjustments for April. They believe that by refusing to compromise on certain things I might have contributed to the tension that led to their fallout. It's frustrating because from my perspective, April had been treating me poorly for months, and I don't feel like those issues were minor at all, but in their eyes they think a little more flexibility on my part could have prevented this entire situation. Ida update 1 to clarify, my family is supportive of me and understands that April has been hard on me for months. However, they do feel that I could have handled things differently, like giving in to basically all her demands. They think because my brother is so protective of me, he might have reacted a little bit too harsh towards April, which might have contributed to the cancellation of your wedding. It doesn't help that April's family has been reaching out to us and blaming me also for the fiasco. I plan on sitting down with my brother and having a more detailed discussion on this to understand where his mind is at. Update 2, it has been a few weeks now since my brother announced that he was canceling his wedding in April, and the reality of the situation has begun to sink in. It feels surreal to think about how quickly everything has changed. In the beginning, I was hopeful that things would resolve themselves and that my brother would find a way to reconcile with the AL, but as the days turned into weeks, it became increasingly clear that their relationship was beyond repair, and he wanted nothing to do with her anymore. I did talk to my brother about why he suddenly called off the wedding. It turns out that April said a lot more nasty things about me and our parents during their fight. My brother confessed that ChatGPT said, ChatGPT, he had been blindsided by how much April had been harboring resentment toward me and my family. She had accused me of sabotaging her wedding and painted me as a major obstacle in their relationship. My brother, who had always been protective of me, felt deeply hurt by how April had spoken about our family, especially since he hadn't fully realized the extent of her feelings until that confrontation. He admitted that he was torn between wanting to support his fiancée and feeling the need to protect me from the ways she had treated me. During their argument, April had gone as far as to say that my actions, or lack of compliance with her demands, had destroyed her future with him. She even blamed my supposed lack of support for her vision for the wedding as a sign of disrespect, claiming that I didn't care about her or my brother's happiness. My brother told me that hearing how she spoke about me, after all I had endured with her, was the tipping point for him. He realized that she didn't respect me, nor did she have any real understanding of what I had been through in my past relationship. I could tell my brother was really struggling with this decision. He loved April and had envisioned a life with her, but her actions made him question their compatibility. It wasn't just the wedding drama, but the way she had painted me in such a negative light. My brother felt betrayed by April's lack of empathy and her willingness to blame me for everything that went wrong between them. It was a difficult conversation, but I appreciated him being so open with me. He was torn between his loyalty to me and his love for April, and the realization that the two were in direct conflict was overwhelming for him. He mentioned that while he knew I had my reasons for refusing to accommodate her unreasonable demands, he also felt that the overall situation escalated because of the tension between us. I tried to assure him that I never wanted to come between him and his happiness, but I couldn't change how I felt about April's behavior toward me. It was hard enough dealing with her undermining me constantly, but for her to go as far as to accuse me of ruining everything was just too much. I told him that while I respected his need to make his own decisions, I couldn't take responsibility for what happened with April. Since then, things have been awkward with my family. They still support me, but I can tell they're frustrated with how things turned out. They've hinted that they wish I had been more flexible in my approach to April's demands, and that maybe a little compromise from my side could have avoided all of this. It's painful to hear, especially since my actions were a direct response to months of being treated poorly. But I've come to realize that some people in my family, especially those who don't fully understand the dynamics of my relationship with April, might have expected me to just let things slide to avoid conflict. In the meantime, I've tried to distance myself from the drama and focus on what's best for me. The whole situation has been emotionally draining, and I'm still processing everything. I don't want to feel guilty for standing up for myself, but it's hard when everyone else seems to have a different perspective on what went wrong. I'm giving myself the space to heal and figure out what I want moving forward. The reality is that my brother's relationship with April is over, and while it's sad, I have to accept that it wasn't meant to be. I just hope that, in time, my family will understand why I did what I did and that they can see the bigger picture. Right now, though, I'm focused on taking care of myself and staying true to my boundaries, grown even closer through this experience, and it feels like we're on the same page now more than ever. I think he finally realizes that while relationships are complicated, personal boundaries and mutual respect are paramount. As much as he cared for April, he now sees that her behavior was not just a clash of personalities but a clear pattern of disrespect. I'm relieved to see that he's in a better place emotionally, even though there are still some lingering feelings of sadness over how things ended. As for me, I've been focusing on healing and moving forward. Blocking April felt like the right decision, not only for my mental health but also to put an end to her toxic influence. I don't need to keep subjecting myself to her manipulative tactics, especially when she's still holding on to anger and blaming me for everything that went wrong in her life. It's clear that her narrative doesn't include any self-reflection, and I can't keep allowing myself to be her punching bag. I've taken this time to reconnect with friends, focus on my own growth, and remind myself that I don't need to carry guilt for making the right decision in a difficult situation. It was never about trying to ruin anyone's life. It was about protecting my own well-being in a toxic relationship. I still feel some sadness when I think about how things turned out, especially knowing how much my brother was hurt by everything. But at the same time, I believe he made the right choice for himself. There's no future with someone who has such a disregard for others' emotions, and now, he's free to build a life that's healthier and more fulfilling. Looking ahead, I'm determined to stay true to myself and not let anyone dictate my happiness or my choices. The experience with April has taught me a lot about standing my ground, and I'm not afraid to continue doing so when necessary. I just hope that my family and I can continue to support each other as we move on from all this.